I recently moved to a new city, and since I was living alone until I could find a roommate, I got into the habit of working late hours, and sometimes even leaving the office at 2 in the morning. I didn't have a problem with it, and my apartment wasn't too far from the office building I worked at. Getting back home late at night wasn't an issue for me, because I could easily grab a cab that late at night, and there were still enough people on the street that it didn't make me feel completely alone. Well, that's what I believed until one particular night. It wasn't the greatest of weather that week. It had been snowing quite a bit, and even for the city, you could tell that not as many people wanted to venture out in the weather like that. Anyways, being the idiot I was, I decided it wouldn't hurt to put a few more hours in the office and make some overtime money to fund some things on my Christmas wish list. The office was emptier than usual that day, which was pretty expected because people were either on vacation or trying to avoid the bad weather outside. Now, my office building has 10 levels, and we're at a small firm that takes up only one of the 10 floors, so I only have access to the floor. The other floors, I can't use my ID to get into. Anyways, it was a pretty laid-back day. I came to the office late in the morning because of the snow, so obviously I had to put in some more hours later in the day than usual to make up for the time lost. As I walked in at 11 a.m., I could tell I was probably one of the very few people in the building. The regular rush of people in the main foyer was almost non-existent. It was a normal work day, pretty slow actually, but by 3 p.m., the few people in the office had already begun to leave because the weather network was warning of another heavy snowfall later in the day. I wasn't worried though. Home was a few subway stops or a small cab ride away. And anyways, I'd be making extra overtime for working on pretty much nothing. By this time, it was nearing 5 p.m. Nothing out of the ordinary. The sky seemed pretty dark, to the point where I could just walk to the windows and just see my reflection. It looked like a night outside. I heard the last few people packing up to go home for an extra long weekend, so I grabbed a quick dinner from the one little coffee store open at the main floor of the building, and by the time I came back up to my cubicle, it felt like any late night I spent at the office. I sat back behind my desk and just bummed around on the internet for a few hours. I procrastinated on the work I wanted to finish before the weekend, so I wouldn't have to come in the next day, and before I knew it, it was nearing 10 p.m. I could hear the storm howling outside, to the point where the sky looked dark gray rather than black. There was an eerie glow of light, red from a giant billboard across the street from our building. And like on schedule, the lights above me turned off at exactly 10:10 p.m. I sighed just before reaching to turn on my desk light. Looks like I was the last one on the floor, again. I decided I'd leave at exactly 11, clock in 12 hours of work, and at least make some overtime pay. So I kept typing on the computer, trying to find a way to kill at least 50 minutes before I could leave, and that's when I heard something. At first, I thought it was nothing. Probably the wind howling. Didn't bother me, so I just kept working away. Then, just a half a minute later, I'd hear it again. A soft shuffle, almost like socks rubbing against carpet. I looked over my shoulder, my back view partially covered by the cubicle wall behind me. Nothing. I tried to focus my attention back on the computer. The brightness was starting to strain my eyes, making them water a bit. Just as I reached up to rub them, again, I heard that sound, shuffling. The sound is getting a bit more distinct now. I moved a bit on my chair, making the spring squeak a bit. The shuffling stopped immediately. Quickly, I went onto our office's MSN, checking to see if anyone was still online. No, I was the only one with the green man besides my name. Everyone else had left. That's when I started to get a bit panicked. So I got up and started walking in the opposite direction from where I was hearing the shuffling, which I had begun to recognize as something between papers rustling and something slowly dragging their feet on the carpeted floor. There wasn't anywhere really to go, just a long hallway that led to the men and women's bathroom, and a few meeting rooms. Faster than I meant to, I pretty much booked it to the hallway, feeling this weird sensation like I was being watched from behind. Just as I got into the bathroom, I locked the door behind me and took a deep breath. I'm just being stupid, I thought to myself, almost laughing. I've been here later than this. The security in the building is awesome. I took a long leak, giving me some time to relieve the nervous energy. Purposely, I took some time getting to the door, unlocking it, and peering outside. The lights in the hallway were on, but they were dim. I looked left and right. Nothing. I gently closed the door behind me so it wouldn't make a sound and started walking back slowly to my desk. But even as I tried to convince myself that there wasn't anyone or anything here, I couldn't help but really feel uneasy and scared. Goosebumps were forming on my arms, even with the heat blasted on the inside of the building. I think what made it worse was the lack of lighting. Even from at least 30 feet away, the only light I could see was a small desk lamp on my desk. Everything else was so dark, and instantly I began to think that there was something out there, waiting from the corners. I decided to then grab my stuff and go. I didn't care if my computer was still on. I still didn't expect to see what I saw. I rounded the corner, was just about to sit on my desk when my eyes glanced up to the screen. I had a Word document open that I was typing a proposal on when I left a minute ago. Instead of the words I thought I had written on, I just saw a bunch of letters. It was gibberish. I just remembered going totally cold. I was in shock for that 1 second, and I wanted to run so badly, but my legs weren't going anywhere. Then, I felt it, like something breathing down my neck. That feeling like there was someone right behind me, even though I knew it was just an empty space. But I felt like if I turned around, I'd be screwed. It was the worst feeling I've ever felt in my life. So just as I was about to turn and run for it, I almost squealed like a little girl when I heard my desk phone start ringing. It took me a second to get my hand to the phone because it was shaking so badly. Quickly, I looked at the screen. Security 5000. Holy crap. I just remembered thinking to myself, holy crap. I grabbed the receiver and held it to my ear. I couldn't even say hello, but I'm pretty sure the guy on the other end could hear my heavy breathing. Hello? John? Is this John? I said yes, but I sounded like a little girl. John, this is building security. Listen to me closely, okay? Get out of there right now. Our monitors picked up something on your floor. Look, just get out of there. Go to the main lobby. Do you understand? I wanted to say something, to prove to the guy that I understood, but at that very moment, I heard a laugh behind me, in the dark, and I sprinted. I can't even explain how I made it. I remember practically dislocating my arm when I banged it into the walls, running in the dark, not sure where I was going, but just out of there. I just wanted to get out of here. I ran like my life depended on it. I was so scared. I felt my entire body go numb. That gibberish typing was stuck in my head. The sound of the security guy's voice, sounding so freaking urgent. And that laugh. What the actual F was that laugh? Where was it coming from? I crashed into the wall, pretty much smashing the buttons and praying an elevator would come fast. I couldn't even look over my shoulder, where now I could distinctly hear something running in the dark, that shuffling noise getting so much louder. Oh my God, was all I remembered saying at that moment. I was punching the elevator buttons now. What was seconds felt honestly like hours. I can't ever remember being that scared in my life. And then I saw an elevator door open, and I ran inside, tripping on my feet onto the elevator floor. I almost crawled to the elevator buttons, pushing any number I saw, just praying that this stupid thing would get me out of here and away from whatever that thing was outside. When the elevator doors finally closed, I felt a bit of relief, just a bit. Then, as I tried to relax, I heard that dreadful sound. I looked up at the little digital screen of the elevator and saw it flash red. My jaw dropped. That stupid elevator wasn't going anywhere. I looked at the buttons I had pressed, and not one of them was the main floor. And since I didn't have my stupid access card with me, the stupid thing was going to stay put on floor 7. Then, I really panicked. Less than a minute, the elevator doors were going to open, and when they opened, that thing was going to be there waiting for me. I felt almost like I was going into a panic attack, or even a heart attack. Then, just as the doors began to open an inch, then another, I lost it. I slammed the emergency button so hard that it got stuck. The elevator immediately began to beep, and thank God the elevator door stopped. But there was still a little gap there, enough for me to stick a few fingers through. I heard the security guy's voice again, this time in the elevator. He knew it was me in there, and he almost started shouting, John, are you okay? Look, stay there, okay? We're coming up. We're getting help, okay? Just stay there. Hurry the hell up, I shouted at the little speaker thing in the elevator. I don't know what's out there. Then, I screamed bloody murder. I just remember backing so hard into the railing behind me in the elevator that my head began to spin, and I was seeing little white stars everywhere. I felt like I was going to have a heart attack, right there. My head was killing when it hit the railing. I could already feel it swelling. But all I could look at was a single black eye staring at me through the crack in the elevator doors, and an inch of a smile on a dark-colored face, and fingers trying to reach me through that crack. I still get major goosebumps telling the story. I think at that moment I passed out in shock. When I woke up, I was surrounded by a bunch of cops and some guys I recognized wearing the building security uniforms. When I came to, they told me what had happened. Apparently, some crazy homeless guy had snuck into the building that day through the underground garage. Security cameras didn't pick him up until much later that night. When the lights went off after 10 p.m. in the building, he'd somehow gotten through the access-protected stairway that led from the garage to each of the floors, and because there was no one there to report him, he kept wandering around until he ended up on our office floor. I felt myself relax a bit when the cops told me this. Just a homeless guy, I kept telling myself. Nothing paranormal, thank God. But then, the cops told me he had a machete on him when they grabbed him that night. Even worse, they found severed squirrel heads and a cat head in his jacket pocket. They said they were glad security told me on time, but even after that, I couldn't sleep for weeks. I moved back home within the month. I used to work for a marketing firm located in the Back Bay section of Boston. It was a small company, but large enough that we operated on the entire floor of the building we rented, and that I was not familiar with anybody else who worked there. I started in 2007 as part of their web-based media team. For those of you who don't know anything about the marketing business, it's very client-driven. This can mean late nights, taking a cab home because the commuter rail has shut down. It also means coming in on weekends and working late then too. It was November of '08, and we had a big promotional site being developed for a rather important client. I'm not at liberty to give out the details surrounding the project, but it's not relevant to the story anyway. What's relevant is that the client was being pushy, as most are, and the site was complex, so I ended up having to come in on a Saturday and working late into that evening to have something ready to present by Monday. If you've ever worked in an office on the weekend, you just know how different and isolated it can be. The lighting in our section was pretty dim. Me and my coworkers would often ignore it, instead of asking for it to get changed. My cubicle was on the far side of the area from the beautiful brick vista, smack dab in a corner with a set of shelves. I only used half the space of a regular cubicle because I was the newest member of the team. It was a little after midday when the producers called me to check on the status of the project. The nice producers came in and stuck around to show their support when you had to come in on weekends. Sometimes they'd go pick up lunch or dinner to reduce your downtime. The not so nice ones called and encouraged you while they went shopping or played golf. Things were going well, and I told her as much. While she began talking about a list of features I should have remembered to use, I heard a noise behind me. It sounded like chains rattling, which I thought was an unusual sound for someone to be making, which is why I got up after finishing the conversation and hanging up and went into the kitchen area to investigate. The kitchen separated our section from the graphic designers group and was at the end of the large open hall that had several meeting rooms attached before ending on the other side of the lobby with the front desk and elevator. There was an old freight elevator right by the kitchen side of the hallway, but we usually avoid using it because it has a tendency of breaking down. There was nobody in the kitchen, but as I turned to look down the hallway toward the front desk, I saw the door to the freight elevator coming to a close. At the same moment, it closed completely. I spotted a coworker heading for the lobby elevator. They turned at the sound of the freight elevator door shutting, saw me and waved. "Don't forget to turn on the security alarm before you leave," he said. "Am I the last one here?" I asked. He nodded and headed for the elevator. When I got back to my desk, the phone was off the hook. I chalked it up at the time to me being forgetful, but I wonder now if it was something else. The line was making that weird static noise you hear when you leave it on the hook for too long, so I hung it up and went back to work. It got dark out and I still wasn't done, so I called my wife to tell her I would be working late and to go ahead and eat without me. As I hung up the phone, I heard a creaking sound, like door hinges. I was feeling a little creeped out by being alone, so I got up and went back to the kitchen area to see if somebody had came in. If they had, and I left before them, I wouldn't have to activate the alarm. Between the cubicles in the kitchen is a very tight hallway, which is where the restrooms are found. As I passed it, I saw the men's room door coming to a close, like I had just missed somebody going in. I waited in that spot for about 5 minutes, trying to look nonchalant about standing around, like I was trying to do something instead of just watch to see if somebody comes out. Finally, feeling increasingly anxious, I walked down the dark hallway and slowly opened the men's room door with the planned excuse of what the hell. I had to go, and this is a bathroom. The bathroom wasn't just empty, it was pitch black. The lights had been out since I came in that morning, and nobody had turned them on. Walking into pitch black unexpectedly like that can really put you in a state. It was like the air got sucked up out of me, and I realized I was holding my breath because everything was dead silent, and my ears had perked up in hoping to catch even the slightest sound. I stood there for a second and then turned on my heel and got out of the bathroom back into the hallway where I clutched the wall like I was afraid it was going to fall away. I wasn't even thinking about whether anybody else was watching me at that point. I couldn't tell you why I was scared at the time. I just was. I did not like being alone in that office. I knew that right outside was a bright lit city, but somehow it all seemed far away. The T station was a block away. I could run to it and be home in a couple hours, but then I'd have to explain to the producers that I wasn't done with the site because I got scared, and she'd tell everybody else, and I'd be the laughing joke of the office. I flipped the light switch to the restroom in the hallway and went back in. The men's room was about the size of 2 of our cubicles. There was 2 stalls, a pair of urinals, and a trio of sinks with a wall-length mirror. Even though I was alone, I went and sat down in the stall. I also just felt the need to sit and relax for a moment. I was beginning to relax when I heard the door creak again, followed by footsteps on the tiles. I was relieved by the sound, because it meant I wasn't alone. Someone else had come in, and all that sudden fear was just me being irrational. I cleared my throat to kinda say that this stall is occupied. The moment I made the sound, the footsteps stopped. I suddenly felt a little anxious again. I cleared my throat a little less obviously, to make it seem like less of an introduction and more like I just had a congestion. The footsteps suddenly began to get closer. When it sounded like they were right outside my stall, they came to a stop. I got real tense and leaned down to look at the person's shoes. There wasn't any. At that moment, I got goosebumps on my arms and my heart rose up into my throat. My stomach was doing cartwheels, but I went into the routine of finishing up, flushing, and opening the stall door. The room was empty. I went over to the sink and began washing my hands, constantly looking over my shoulder and around the room in the mirror. I went to the dryer and started it up, and I was rubbing my hands together when I heard another sound right behind me. I could see in the reflective chrome of the dryer nozzle. The other stall door was shut, where before it was wide open. At that point, I didn't care whether or not my hands were wet or not. I wiped them on my pants and turned for the door out of that room. The whole space felt smaller, more confined, and as I walked past the stalls, I heard the click of the lock. I didn't look in. I didn't want to see even if there was somebody there. I just ran the last few feet, yanked the door open as hard as I could, and bolted down the dark hallway, back to the safety of my computer. When I got back to the desk, my phone was off the hook again. I could hear someone speaking, even before I picked it up. I put it to my ear and listened. At that time, it will be 7:43. I held the phone there, listening for the mentioned tone. I turned and watched the hallway I had just came from, even though from my desk I couldn't see down there. There was no other sounds except the hiss of the radiator and the computer fan. The recorded voice played again, but this time it was different. It sounded like one of those old cassette tape players when you only held the play button halfway down. It was deeper and slower, and I did not feel any comfort in it anymore. At that time, it will be 7:43. I hung up. At that point, I decided that I did not want to be there anymore, and I didn't care if I got laughed at later for it. I grabbed my sachet and saved my work. Just as I told my windows to shut down, the phone rang. Instinctively, I picked it up, figuring it was just the producer calling. I'd just tell her I'd come in tomorrow and finish it, and that's what I'd do. At that time, it will be 7:45, said the voice. I hung up and pulled the cord out. The phone at the desk next to mine rang. I ignored it and grabbed my stuff to get the hell out of there. I decided that as I walked, that my best course of action was to go into the kitchen, walk the long hallway to the front desk, and wait for the elevator. Then, I remembered I had to set the alarm. The alarm pad was past the elevator, around the corner, back by the executive offices. Not a big problem, I thought. As I walked past the dark hall towards the kitchen, I looked down just to make myself feel better. The door to the men's room was wide open. Worse, it was pitch black inside again. But I realized as I stopped and looked that I never had turned it off. I turned away and went into the kitchen, trying not to think about the fact that the men's room was just on the other side of the wall of the hallway I was about to go down. I looked down the hall at the front desk, and the elevator was out of there, and it never seemed so far away before. I took a step, and from behind me came another sound that sent shivers down my spine. The crash bar on the fire escape being pushed. I turned 180. The fire escape was located right next to the director's office, and was just about 2 rows of the cubicles away from the kitchen area. As I watched, the door to the fire stairs down to the back of the building swung slowly open into the darkness. I turned back towards the hall and ran. The sound of a ding indicated the arrival of the freight elevator, and as I passed it, its door slowly began to open, just like the stall door in the bathroom. I heard the sound of the rattling chains from the inside, but I didn't look. I was running for that front desk, running for the elevator down the lobby. When I got there, I slammed into the wall between the elevator doors and punched at the down button desperately. I turned back to look where I came from. Every time I do, I think of Lot's wife in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. You never effing look back. Ever. The back area of the office was bathed in blackness. I could not see at all. There was some light coming into the kitchen from the developer area, but even as I stood there watching it, it seemed to fade and become darker. I looked at the elevator floor, indicating and prayed that the approaching car was brightly illuminated. 2, 3, 4. The ding of its arrival was beautiful. The doors opened to a well-lit salvation. I scrambled into the elevator and frantically hammered at the ground floor button. As the door slowly started closing, I watched the encroaching darkness seem to swallow the office. When the car reached the ground floor, I was squashed down into the corner, terrified that it would be at any moment fill the compartment and eat me. I bolted through the lobby and onto the street, where I promptly threw up, grossing out a past cyclist who yelled words of encouragement as he continued down the street. I did not return to the office the next day. I told the producer I had gotten violently sick, and she talked to the client into extending the deadline. I got yelled at for forgetting to set the alarm, but no harm was done. 3 months later, they reorganized the back area of the office, built the subcoordinate offices, tore down a wall between our section and the kitchen, and set up the cubicles up in a more standard format, moving me from my little corner by the dark hallway. I never went down that dark hallway again. In the remaining year that I was there, if I had to go, I walked down to the front desk and took the elevator down to a floor where there were public access restrooms, much bigger, much cleaner, much brighter, and far less haunted.